Hi, I'm Carmen.
And I'm Steven, and this is Vienna Past and Present,
where we walk through the gilded and sometimes not so gilded halls of Vienna's history. So, Steven, did you know that Vienna is considered the spying capital of the world? If you didn't, that might be because Vienna really likes to keep things secret, which makes it a perfect place for spies.
Okay, I've heard of this here and there, but this doesn't necessarily occur to me when I think of modern Vienna and, of course, its amazing livability scores as a city. So, yeah, I'm curious where this came from. I would assume this is something from some point in the Habsburg era, like just if the dynasty lasted that long, they probably had good espionage and security going on. But yeah, Carmen, how did Vienna get to be the spy capital of the world, in quotes, and what does that even mean?
Well, first, we need a bit of background. You are right that it has to do with Habsburg times and that it kind of starts from there. So the reputation of Vienna as a city of espionage does go back to Habsburg times, and really one of the earliest things that is often cited in this field is that there were Austrian innovations such as the first modern postal system in the world, which I actually worked for a little while at the Austrian Post a few years ago in the IT department. So, and
okay.
Interestingly, this factoid did not ever come up. I would think that it would, but somehow it didn't, so...
I guess you didn't get into the inner circle like you should have. Maybe next time. Okay.
So I only learned this when researching this episode, that actually Austria had the first modern postal system in the world, which was developed under Maximilian I in around 1490.
Okay, he's definitely a character in Austrian history. He's already on our list to do an episode about, so maybe we'll return to him at some point. Okay, so he is developing the postal system, and that's where it started. That kind of makes sense. Okay, literally looking at documents.
Yeah, it's about documents and it's about improving communication, right? So the initial impetus behind it or intention behind it was to improve communication between his far-flung territories. So this was a time when you had this Habsburg Empire that sort of had, it was very spread out. It had lots of territories that were far away. And so having a modern postal system really helped, facilitate that communication.
Okay.
And ultimately it helped news to reach the emperor wherever he was. And this new system that they implemented made it basically twice as fast as it had been for him to receive news, communications, whatever, wherever he was. So it was quite innovative. Yeah. And a big part of it also was that it was very, very regular and reliable service. And a little side benefit of the whole thing was that it was very useful for espionage, of course.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. Like you have documents going through these, places that are manned by people that work for the empire. Okay, totally natural.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you have Vienna's location between East and West. That really kind of made it this hub anyway. Lots of information was flowing through here. You have this empire that has some power at the time, but really grows during this period. And so Vienna already back in, the 15th century, into the 16th century, became an intelligence hub where all this information was flowing in and out, both officially and then, through the postal service, which was obviously an official service, but there was a lot of letter interception and surveillance that was happening in connection with that as well.
Okay.
And so, as I said, on the one hand, that really helped the Habsburgs become more powerful. But then, of course, the more powerful they became, they also needed more intelligence gathering, more surveillance to kind of maintain that power and or expand.
Okay.
So you have that prehistory, and it is a very long history, right? So I was talking around about 1490 then. But I think it really comes into its own in the early 19th century under the influence of Clemens von Metternich, who was the Austrian foreign minister from 1809 until 1848. And this is a period where espionage kind of really evolves in a new way.
Okay, this is another name that I've definitely heard. He is a major character in Austrian history that we will probably return to. I might add that to the episode list right now, if it's not on there already. Okay.
Yeah, he'll definitely come up, and we probably should do an episode just on him because he had his finger in like every pot.
So yeah, we have some major characters from like totally different centuries all working to this. Okay, this is a lot already.
So Metternich, he's famous for quite a lot of things. The thing that he's most famous for or most connected with was chairing the Congress of Vienna in 1814 and 1815. Do you know what that was?
So I know of this vaguely. This is kind of like Napoleonic stuff, right? Like Europe was in complete upheaval after that, all of these wars, and then how do you like set something up to, I guess, be stable, but I imagine to favor Austria, right? Like in his case.
Yes, exactly. So this was a Congress that was held in Vienna, and as you say, it was after the Napoleonic Wars, to try to basically figure out a new political order and ensure long-term peace.
Mm-hmm.
And Metternich himself was quite conservative. He was a big monarchist, and so he was,
Right.
yeah, as you say, really trying to make sure that the empire survives and, you know, position the Habsburg Empire in a good way and ensure some kind of stability within Europe.
Okay.
And during this Congress, well, not only during the Congress, but I think the Congress is sort of emblematic of how Metternich ran his affairs.
Mm-hmm.
There was a saying that he taught the walls to listen.
Whoa. Okay, that's a big saying. Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, the walls are listening in.
Yeah.
You know, he kind of knew everything that was going on, and he had a really tight intelligence operation. During the Congress, he kept tabs on all of the participants. So there were participants from all across Europe who were, you know, who came to Vienna for these various discussions, and they would bring guests with them, you know, partners, family, whatever. Metternich apparently kept tabs on all of them.
Wow.
And made sure that he knew who was who, who's coming with who, where are they, what are they doing, where are they staying, you know.
Yeah, which I guess is like, okay, this is maybe kind of creepy and very invasive or something, but then also something about this just sounds kind of like modern due diligence almost, like in some respects. It's like if you have all these people here, maybe you're not like listening to everything they say, but you're going to know who they are. And like this, a lot of this is just like modern statecraft kind of stuff. Anyway, okay.
I think it's also just part of the political aspect of it, right? The more I know about these people's positions and who they're hanging around with and what their ideologies are, the more I can kind of manipulate that or spin it or maneuver it in a way that works for me. But he did take it a little bit further. He became very known for having a secret cabinet of people that were not only masters in opening and resealing letters, but they were also experts in deciphering messages, you know, deciphering codes, because of course people started to kind of figure out that maybe people were listening in, and so they started writing in code. But so he had people that were, you know, good, you know, with cryptology and deciphering things, and they also started to plant false messages as well. So this is like a full propaganda operation.
Okay, so it's getting out of control a little bit here. Yeah, wow. I'm imagining like people melting the wax on something and then like putting the wax back kind of stuff. Wow.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. I mean, you know, these letters were sealed with wax seals, and so that was a big part of it, was how do you reseal something? Yeah. And I guess they had quite a professional operation going on there. It was very efficient, and apparently they were able to do it in such a way where the delay in delivering letters wouldn't really be noticed, so they were kind of that fast and efficient about it.
Yeah, he sounds like a spy master now. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this is a bit exaggerated as well. I mean, you know, I guess he probably wanted to also, you know, intimidate others, and I don't know how much of this is sort of after his lifetime trying to kind of build him up, but it does seem to really be the case that they did a lot of this sort of propaganda with planting false stories, reading letters, knowing what was going on. And so it was a very elaborate espionage regime that kept tabs on the one hand, but also really actively meddled in foreign affairs.
Okay, this is interesting. I don't want to like jump the gun here, but I think my idea sometimes of Vienna is kind of like, oh, you know what? The geography, like, we're just in the middle of this thing. How did this happen to us? Like, Viennese history kind of had a hand in some of this. Okay, there was a tradition existing, obviously. Okay, when this stuff kind of heated up in more modern times. All right.
I mean, yeah, I think Vienna and Austria as a whole has a real reputation, or has become, it's sort of a master at pretending like it's neutral and like, oh, we're just kind of in the middle, don't mind us.
Right.
While in the background, they totally have their fucking fingers and everything, you know.
Okay, all right.
So, you know, plausible deniability is what we're good at.
It's useful.
So, yeah, like I said, the main intent really was to maintain the conservative order at the time and to root out any revolutionary activities, because it was a time, you know, early 1800s, the first half of the 19th century was a time of all these different revolutions and revolutionary ideas, and there was a lot of turmoil in the post-Napoleonic period, and trying to root that out and get a handle on it was really his main intent. And in the course of that, he really built up this very professional espionage and intelligence operation. Yeah,
and not to make it about him, but like the bits I remember about Metternich is like, people say that it kind of worked. Like, he extended the life of the Habsburg, you know, dynasty for like 100 years. And right? Is that kind of your takeaway too? Like, this was successful overall?
Yeah, he does get credited with that. And he did manage through the Congress of Vienna, they came up with sort of an agreement on how the political order would look in Europe. And that, it lasted for the next, I don't know if it was quite 100 years, but yeah, something close to that. So moving on through time. So there was spying in Vienna during the World Wars, with really large numbers of operatives being active during World War I in the city. With the Anschluss, the landscape gets pretty complicated because then Austria was officially part of Germany. And I'm going to skip over this a little bit because it gets all very muddled in the wartime. I think everybody's kind of spying on everybody during war, and there was lots of shifting alliances, and just a very confused period, I think. But it was the post-war period that really cemented Vienna's status as a spy capital.
Okay, so at the end of World War II, Vienna was divided into occupation zones by the Allied powers, just like Berlin was. This is something that I think, people don't always know. I definitely learned about this later, like after, the sort of East and West Berlin stuff, I guess I learned about like in high school or something. So there were different administrations there in close contact. They were cooperating and, of course, competing, like as the dust literally settled. So, yeah, makes sense that espionage would get woven into like the city fabric again in this time.
Right. I think people maybe forget that Vienna was also divided. I think most people maybe knew it at some point, but people think much more of Berlin.
Right, because there's no like East and West Vienna, like the Soviets pretty much left, right? And
you didn't have like blockades and, airlifts and whatever. But Vienna, just like Berlin, was divided into the 4 different zones. And of course, hotbed for spy activity. It was also the era of declared neutrality. So in the post-war period, you still had this occupation period. You had the Allied forces, splitting the country and the city of Vienna into the 4 zones. And Austria basically declared itself neutral at this time. And that created really good cover for spies on all sides because it was considered neutral ground. And so, people just kind of converged into the city as a place where they could spy on each other, where it was a neutral territory for everyone.
Right.
Of course, during the Cold War, you had a lot of American and Russian spies here. Those were, 2 of the big players, and it was a good place for them to kind of keep tabs on each other. Initially, the CIA, so from the American side, the CIA, their initial kind of surveillance in the city was to kind of keep tabs on the remnants of Nazism. But then they pretty quickly realized that, as the Cold War was kind of starting to shape up, that spying on the Soviets would probably be more productive, or, they were more interested then in what was going on with the Soviets.
Right. And that flip was kind of happening around the world, right? Where they're kind of like, oh, wait, we have this new enemy right away on all these other fronts. So it makes sense that would happen here too.
No, it's so interesting. They went from being allies to pretty quickly being adversaries and just immediately started spying on each other. And so, of course, the occupation and division of the city was very conducive to this because you had an American zone in Vienna and then you had a Soviet zone. And so you had lots of these operatives running around. Another thing that contributed to all of this was that Vienna and or Austria itself wasn't really very interesting for intelligence agencies. So initially, the CIA was kind of interested in the remnants of Nazism, but then, that interest faded pretty quickly. So actually spying on Austria or on Vienna was not all that interesting to most people. This was just kind of a war-torn country where there wasn't that much going on, but it became a very useful place to spy on each other.
Okay, interesting. So it's just kind of the setting. Yeah.
It's just kind of the setting, and it also became a very exciting place for spies. So, it's like spies draw more spies, right? The fact that there are spies here means that other spies show up because they want to know what those spies are doing, and then it just becomes its own little, reinforcing dynamic.
Right, and I've also read that this was a place where there were a lot of displaced people, there were a lot of, like, refugees, prisoners of war. There were people that had, strong anti-communist views coming here and strong, communist views. It makes sense that this is a place where, people are like fleeing. They are trying to be closer to the East. They're trying to be closer to the West. I looked this up just before this episode. Vienna's only 60 kilometers from Hungary, which at that point was this country, on the opposing side. That's about 35 miles for Americans. That's, just a bit further from Slovakia. Like, this really geographically at that point, you try to remember, like, this time when there wasn't email or just, like, Google Street View. Like, this was very, very close.
Yeah. Slovakia, Czechia, as it's now called, as you correctly reminded me before we started recording this, since I always call it the Czech Republic. But anyway, Czechia, Hungary, all of them are really close. I mean, if you don't drive more than an hour to the border of any of those countries from Vienna.
Yeah, super well located for them.
Additionally, kind of connected mostly with the neutrality, right? The fact that Austria was neutral in the post-war period also drew some of the big international organizations. And so the United Nations has headquarters in Vienna. There's, I think, 4 UN headquarters in the world, and one of them is Vienna. I think it's New York, Geneva, and...
Okay.
What's the 4th one?
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Maybe we'll get some frustrated tweets or something. Okay.
What, the disgruntled...
It's about Vienna, right? This show. So, okay, don't add us.
So, point of the story is that Vienna is one of the UN headquarters. And then you also have, pretty much every country has an embassy here. And then there's also diplomatic missions. So you have a lot of cover for spies and diplomatic immunity through all of these international organizations. That's like one of the very common places that spies officially work.
Right. The classic thing, right, is like, oh, this is an embassy worker. This is a something, right? Like a commerce, person. Yeah. All right. Got it.
Another international organization that's here is the OSCE, which is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, I think, which... It's kind of an interesting one. It doesn't really have much of a purpose to it these days, but it's a post-war and Cold War institution that basically was about, how do we secure and cooperate with each other in terms of, military security, which with the end of the Cold War really kind of lost any real purpose. But it's one of the few places that the United States and Russia still sit down together at a table and have some forum to talk to each other. And I think that's kind of why it still exists. Another organization that is located here that maybe a lot of people don't know is OPEC. OPEC has its headquarters in Vienna.
Oh, I didn't know it was based there. Yeah, okay. There's a lot happening here in Vienna, right?
Yeah, so...
a lot less stuff people would want to spy on.
Right. Things you want to spy on, and on the other side, places where you can put spies undercover and pretend like they're OPEC workers. Also very convenient.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And so a lot of these people, I think not OPEC so much, but the UN for sure, the embassies, you have diplomatic immunity. So people can get away with a lot.
Right, okay. Lots of unpaid parking tickets.
Yes, there's lots of them. There's also kind of a saying in Vienna, I guess. I mean, I've never heard anybody say this, but I could totally imagine it. I'll say it in German first and then translate it. But there's kind of this saying that goes, wenn zwei Leute in Wien aufeinandertreffen, arbeiten sicher 3 davon bei einem Geheimdienst, which means that if 2 people in Vienna meet each other, they work for at least 3 different secret services or intelligence services.
Okay, wow.
Between the 2 of them, they're spying on 3 different things. That's the vibe.
Yeah, so it's definitely... Vienna knows it about itself. Okay.
Yeah. And then, on top of that, Vienna also became a very good place to recruit agents in the Cold War, right? Aside from the fact that you have all these spies here, it's also located very fortuitously. You have a strong socialist and communist movement going on. Then you have these vehement anti-communists in, this Cold War period. And so both the US and Russia had really good pools to recruit from, and both of them were heavily recruiting in Austria to get spies for each other.
Right, because this is not like... It's like a Western country, but it's not in NATO. It's not, aligned in the same way that, countries on its own border are.
Exactly. So, right, that's another good point. It's not in NATO. That also maybe helped provide a bit more of this neutral ground where all of these activities could take place. And also historically, you have to say, if you look at the Habsburg times, and even today, there are very strong commercial ties between Austria and especially the Eastern countries. So that kind of makes it very unique, right? As you say, it was a Western country. It was not behind the Iron Curtain. But historically, there always have been much closer ties to Czechia, to Slovakia, Hungary, the general Central Eastern Europe region. That was the old Habsburg Empire. And so those connections have been maintained. And even today, the American embassy here in Vienna also covers Bratislava. Many businesses, kind of operate out of Vienna, but then also cover Hungary, Slovakia, Czechia, whatever, all from Vienna. And so you have these ties that are very close.
Yeah, and that's something that I think we forget about, at least in the US, or when you're just like consuming anything about Austria or Vienna or something. Like there were these connections from this centuries-long empire. And at that point, like what we're talking about, that only ended a few decades ago at that point. So, of course, you would have like literal families that would have, people on both sides and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm sure the connections were just all over the place and deep.
Exactly. Another point that I want to make very quickly is from a historian. He kind of has this quote that I think kind of sums it up. So Siegfried Beer is a historian who has studied espionage and kind of the intelligence services in Vienna and in Austria.
Okay.
And he makes the point that espionage was a business. So he says, quote, espionage was a business. It still is. It brings a lot of people with a lot of money and a lot of support into the country. And I think that a little bit sums it up, right? This is good business for Austria.
Right.
It brings the people. It brings these organizations, these international organizations. Austria can kind of maintain this, neutrality orientation, but then still have, kind of their finger on the pulse and have something really happening in the city.
And I mean, whatever. I obviously don't know tons about spying, but I'm just thinking from like a point of view of, someone with a business. It's like, oh, I own a hotel and, someone... Or like, Russia wants to rent the penthouse for 1 month. You're tempted, right? Like, of course.
It's good business, that's for sure. You just turn a blind eye.
Yeah. And that, in a bazillion other, different ways and iterations, like, yeah, that would probably be something you would, be tempted by, like everybody would be. Okay, so how it became a spy city, that's a lot more clear to me now. What about after the Cold War ended? I would guess that, so much more is digital now. The Iron Curtain fell, borders of conflicts, they shift. And I know that you yourself have gone to Slovakia for dinner, and you returned that night, I think. So obviously a lot has changed since the 1990s. Like, what is the state of the, spies in Vienna now?
Yeah, we pop over to Bratislava for dinner sometimes. I mean, why not? It's right there. I mean, I'm serious. I have occasionally done that.
Not a security risk, I guess, anymore.
Not so much anymore. But still, yeah, Vienna continues to be a conduit to the east, right? All these connections that I was talking about before, they are still there, or they've even been strengthened in the post-war period. And so you still have this real connection between the east and the west. Austria itself is, considered the west, but then the ties to the east are very, very strong. Vienna has also been used as a location for spy exchanges in the last decades. So I don't know if you remember in the news in around 2010, there was this US-Russia spy swap.
Okay, I remember some of them, like some that had like families or some that had like this random, socialite. Was it one of those?
I think this was the one that I'm talking. There were a couple, as you say, but I think there was only one big spy swap. I think the other ones were sort of, they found some spies and then I don't exactly know what happened with them. Mm-hmm. There was one big spy swap where 10 Russian agents were flown from the US and then 4 US agents were flown from Russia to Vienna. Right. Okay. So I don't know. The US found these agents or people that they suspected of being Russian agents. And I think they were living in families and, they were like in Ohio in like some small town or whatever, like just very unassuming. Anyway, the US found them and, suspected them of being spies. Russia on the other side also had found 4 US agents or people that they claimed were US agents. And basically after some discussion and negotiations, they said, okay, we're going to swap these agents. And that exchange happened at the Vienna airport.
Oh, okay.
So basically the Russians were flown from the US to Vienna, the Americans were flown from Russia to Vienna. And then because it's a neutral country, and then there was also something about, they actually never even entered the airport. So they just had 2 planes like parked on the tarmac next to each other. And then it was sort of this fly-by-night operation of like, okay, people get off this plane, get on that plane. Other people...
All right, but I guess Vienna knows how to do that. Okay, so all right.
Exactly. And so nobody officially entered the country, apparently, since they never actually left the tarmac. But it was the biggest spy swap since the Cold War. And, Vienna does kind of still serve as a setting for that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's something that feels very retro about that. I think like flights or something like, why not just do Istanbul? It's probably a bigger airline hub, right? But yeah, the geographic location of Vienna, like I guess it still would be favorable if you're dealing with Russia especially, which I guess is going to be, it's still a theme and probably going to be more of a theme.
Yeah, I mean, that's not over. Yeah, I don't know. I think Vienna just has established itself as a place like that. And I think the neutrality of, like the official neutrality of Austria helps a lot. Turkey might be a little bit more fraught in terms of what does that mean geopolitically.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. On top of that, Austria is neutral, is, considered just kind of a Western country, but is very friendly with Russia. And it is one of the few EU countries that really has such deep Russian ties, which is something that has come up in the past couple of years because, obviously Russia-US is more of an issue, or Russian meddling in general in, various political scenes. And also with gas, like the EU kind of is trying to eliminate its reliance on Russian gas in the past couple of years. And Austria was one of the main countries that was still importing a lot of Russian gas. And so that became a real topic in the EU, and a criticism of Austria that, we still were financing a lot of the Russian war machinery, basically, at the end of the day.
Right.
There was also, this was several years ago now, I want to say like 2017, 18, somewhere around there. There were photos of Putin at the wedding of Austria's foreign minister, this woman Karin Kneißl. So, I mean, that's how close the ties are, right? It's like she invited him to her wedding and he came and danced with her.
Okay, I remember seeing that in the news here in the US, actually. Like, sometimes there's this European news that's like, it's just a story, and we're kind of like, huh? Like, there'll be like a random headline, like, oh, Putin at this wedding. And then there's like no follow-up, in the U.S. news anywhere, at least that I see. So I'm guessing she has a dacha now, or did that just kind of like blow over?
I mean, she probably does.
Do you know what happened?
Honestly, I don't know. She's not in government anymore, and I don't really know what she's doing. But yeah, she probably has some nice vacation home on the Black Sea. Who knows? I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's a deep connection. Foreign minister.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so spy activity has reportedly also increased since the war with Ukraine. In Vienna, so apparently Vienna has become more of a hotbed of Russian espionage now again with the war.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess obviously in wartime there's always even more need for intelligence and surveillance and all of these things. And I mean, I can't say that I've noticed. I mean, it's not like I'm in the spy scene. I don't really know. It makes me think, like, how many spies have I encountered and not known? I mean, I must have, right?
Wow.
I've lived here for 16 years.
Probably.
Yeah,
probably.
I'm sure I've encountered spies and just not known. I even worked at the American Embassy for a while, so I know I must have seen some there.
I think yes. Yeah. Yeah, I'd imagine, because I kind of had this question for you. I was like, hey, is this something you experience? Or like, what do Viennese think about it? I guess, it would be this abstract thing, because if they're doing their job, like, you don't know if they're spies, right? Or they're like in their office, melting some letter wax and you don't see it.
Exactly.
Right?
So it's a thing that exists because people say it exists, but you don't really experience it, obviously. Otherwise, they would all be very bad spies, and then they're not around for very long.
Right. Well, I am looking forward to spying-related episodes in the future. I was kind of scanning some searches I did, and there's some interesting incidents that we could cover now that we kind of have this foundation. Any other cool tidbits you found? Any advice for aspiring spies? This is, I guess, an ongoing story, so we can lead this however we want.
Well, there's a couple things that we haven't talked about that I think might be interesting. So, aspiring spies out there. One thing that might very much help in Vienna is that most of the first district, which is, the center of the city, is connected by underground tunnels and cellars. So you can very effectively move around the city without being seen if you want to. Most of these cellars and tunnels are kind of closed off today, and they're not really accessible. And a lot of them no longer connect because they've been closed and whatever. But some of them do still exist. And I can imagine that, some intelligence services might use some of these tunnels and cellars.
Yeah.
And some of them you can visit today. I don't know if you remember, but we actually went to a restaurant once in the first district that had this 4-level cellar under it. I went down to see it because I thought it was really interesting, and I don't think you did, but it had 4 layers of cellars, and the stairs, just kept going, and it's super twisty and windy. And then they also said, this actually connects. You could walk from here underground unseen to the Hofburg, which, is the Habsburg palace in the city, and it all connects.
Yeah. Crazy. Okay, yeah. All right. That's maybe its own episode. What the heck?
Yeah, it might be. There's some interesting stuff there. I think the restaurant was called Kellergwölb or something like that. I can look it up and add it to the show notes in case it interests anybody if they happen to be in Vienna.
All right.
And if anybody's seen The Third Man, that's something that I think we also will definitely have to do an episode about. the movie The Third Man,
Yeah.
it uses this, like these underground tunnels and this, underground pathways in the city as one of the plot points. Also, the movie itself is about spies and kind of the history of spying in Vienna. And so I think that could be part of our ongoing
Yeah, it's come up
series.
before. Yeah, okay. So we have tunnels that we can walk around in. All right, Vienna's making it easy so far.
Yes.
For starter spies.
Yeah. Then, very important, the legal aspect. As long as you're not spying on Austria, it is not illegal to engage in spy activity in Austria. So the government turns a totally blind eye to espionage as long as the target is not Austria. So all the aspiring spies out there, just don't target Austria. Spy on each other, do what you want, as long as it's not Austria that's targeted. We don't care.
Gosh, like if you have all this happening, it would be probably you'd have to like double the police force. So I mean, part of it, I just feel like it's hard to blame them.
I mean, that's a very good point. I actually found a quote from an official with regards to this, and they said if they changed the law, like if the Austrians changed the law, they would have to try and enforce it. And the fact of the matter is they probably can't. And that would be even more embarrassing.
It'd be really hard. Yeah. Wow.
Exactly. So, as long as you're not spying on Austria, you're not really getting in any legal hot water. So, spy to your heart's content.
I mean, gosh, yeah. I feel like I could just like have a go at it. Okay.
It is the place if you're going to try it. And so I guess, a skiing holiday is a really good, that's a popular one. If you're trying to get a source or if you're trying to like recruit somebody, skiing holidays or a Viennese ball. Also a really good tip. I think that's one place where you can kind of recruit some people.
Okay.
Or get some sources. And there's lots of places you can get information very easily around this place.
You just did go on a ski vacation.
I did.
I think we should just let that hang. Okay?
Yes.
You don't have to comment. Draw your own conclusions.
I will just say that the après-ski involved 4 separate locations, so make of that what you will.
Wow. All right. That's a lot of tunnels to navigate, okay, after some drinks.
On skis, no less.
Yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's pretty much it. If you want to keep tabs on somebody or engage in some shady business, then Vienna just might be the place to do it.
It's making a good case for itself.
Just as long as y'all are spying on each other and not on us.
All right. That's a great note to leave it on. It's like a Viennese customer service experience a little bit. Okay.
Kind of. Oh, that's another thing we can get into at some point. But anyway, we're going to leave it here for now. So that's it for our show. Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, share with your friends or leave us a 5-star review. And if you didn't like it, then, well, don't worry about that review.
You can find us on social medias, Vienna Past and Pres on Instagram, or send us your episode ideas at viennapastandpresent@gmail.com.
Auf Wiedersehen, pfiat euch, Baba.
Bye.